Welcome, fans, to another edition of the Old School Shooters podcast. My name is Jack Kilby, Executive Vice President of Great North Wrestling. We are very pleased to welcome today a man who has made his mark in both mixed martial arts, combat sports, scientific wrestling, and pro wrestling. That would be Bulletproof Blake Troop. Before we segue into him, I must introduce my co-host of this venture, the one, the only King of Connecticut. King, how are you this morning, sir?
Oh man, I'm doing great. It's a great Saturday for the pernicious purveyor of preposterous pomposity and the paragon of pugilistic punditry. I just got off the phone with DDP, Diamond Dallas Page, and he's going to be coming on the show here in the next couple of weeks with an old guest of ours, one of my old running buddies and training partners, John Shattuck, old school fighter and gym owner. So looking forward to that. And I'm really excited about our guest today, man. A lot of folks talking about this gentleman. You know, I was just in Jacksonville a couple months ago with Dan Severn selling my book, Rough and Tumble, at his table, and we were chatting up with Drew Anderson, who's been here on the channel. Jack, I was part of that crew with Kevin Sullivan, and I saved Drew from a beating last year in Daytona. And I'll tell you, he was asking me, he said, "Do you know about Troop?" He said, "This guy's awesome." And everybody's talking about Troop. He's got the skills. He's a great, solid shooter, great MMA fighter. He's got a number of fights under his belt, and a great pro wrestler and a great promo. And without further ado, man, Troop, how you doing, brother?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on, guys. For those of you who are not familiar who I am, Blake Bulletproof Troop, known for dropping warheads on people's foreheads, professional mixed martial arts fighter, combat sports analyst, and professional wrestler. I do a little bit of everything in the combat sports entertainment world, and it's a pleasure to be on the Old School Shooters podcast. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome, man. So, Troop, just in the last few weeks, we've been on some talks, on some calls with a great friend of mine that just did his podcast yesterday. Also been on Old School Shooters, past guest Jack, Jake Shannon of Scientific Wrestling and Shoot Pro Wrestling. And we don't want to let cats out of the bag too much, but I want to give Troop the floor to talk about some of the exciting things that are in development with respect to Shoot Pro Wrestling.
So for those who aren't familiar with Shoot Pro Wrestling, if this is something new to you guys, this is Shoot Legitimate Combat under professional wrestling rules. So you'll see guys get in and have basically what you'd imagine old school wrestling was supposed to look like, where guys are actually in there legitimately competing under the set of professional wrestling rules, meaning there's rope breaks. I'm not sure if there are pins or not. I believe there are, but I'm not 100% sure. Pins are hard to
Yeah,
get.
I can clarify that because I'm the business development guy for them, and yeah, it's a pinfall and submission, so that really forces the action, man.
And it's also a best out of three, which is really implementing all the old school catch rules. You know, when I competed at the Billy Robinson Classic, it was 2 out of 3 falls, which is how a lot of old NWA style professional wrestling matches were, and that's how the Shoot Pro matches are. Which, in my opinion, that's the real winner. Who wins 3 times? Because sometimes get caught, you know. But how many times is that going to happen out of 3? So in having a 3 fall, in my opinion, really finds the most skilled winner or the most prepared winner on occasion, because if you didn't prepare, you might not have 3 rounds of gas in you. Or you go in and get the job done quick in 2, and there isn't a third, ideally. You know, my coach always says you keep the judges out of it and you won't be disappointed.
Absolutely, man.
Like I was saying, it's professional shoot competition under professional wrestling rules, and it's something that I really think is going to be the future of combat sports entertainment. I really think that professional wrestling is going to take a veer in that direction, and I think UFC is going to take a veer in the entertainment direction, especially because both major companies are under the same roof of Endeavor now. So you know that they're going to be working together to build each other's brands. So this is really, in my opinion, the cutting edge of combat sports entertainment today.
Absolutely, man. And let's talk about that a little bit. In Denver, I had the pleasure of meeting Ari Emanuel back at the John Jones fight. We were at a dinner together with a group of lawyers that actually we've talked about this on the show. Kind of a controversial figure, but a really old friend of mine, uh, Phil Baroni. We did his last interview before his unfortunate situation in Mexico here on Old School Shooters. And I was able to utilize our law firm's connections with Garcia Group in Mexico to kind of help Phil get into a safer environment. That started these CTE TBI suits that have really blossomed tremendously. And I'm with the same group of attorneys that successfully sued the NFL, created the fund for NFL players. So that's why I was at this dinner. This was before. This was when the rumor was the Saudi government was going to purchase WWE. So this was before the announcement was made. And I briefly met Ari at this dinner, and I had a chance to talk to him. When you're at a few people, you don't get the full audience. But the thing that stuck with me was he mentioned that he was more of a WWE pro wrestling fan, had been for a long time, than a UFC fan. So that's pretty telling there. And man, Shoot Pro, it just it fits in so perfectly. And we've talked a lot on this show, being Old School Shooters, about the history of catch wrestling and professional wrestling and how the roots of the same tree, MMA and pro wrestling. We don't need to get deep into the weeds on that. We've talked about that here before, but just it's unbelievable. And Troop, I can tell you, man, that Jake Shannon and I both feel that you're going to be a star. You're going to be a top competitor in the Shoot Pro Wrestling organization. And that's why one of the main reasons we really wanted to have you on the Old School Shooters.
I appreciate all the belief in me. I have worked very hard for a very long time to get to where I'm at. And one thing that I love about being pushed at a show like Shoot Pro is you earned it. People ain't laying down for you. This is old school shooting right here. So I appreciate the faith that you have in me and my brand. To give a little info about myself in terms of competition, I've competed countless times. I just cut a promo the other day. I got like 30 medals. 3 of them are silver, or 4 of them are silver, which I learned a lesson with each of those silvers, but the rest are gold. I go out and I train, I compete hard. I have 14 professional MMA fights. And this past July 1st, I competed at brown belt for a world champion jiu-jitsu tournament. I took home second place, which I wasn't super satisfied with. I prefer to take home gold medals. But like I said, with those silver medals, I learned some lessons. But I love competing. There's something that when you've been competing your whole life, you just got to compete. And everything in life, in my opinion, is a competition, whether it's a job, whether it's for the girl, whether it's for the apartment you want. Everything in life, you got to put in effort and compete, and you really see the results of your efforts. So that's one of the things I love about shoot competition, particularly one-on-one shoot competition, where there's nobody to blame. There's no best player to pass the shot to, or like person to be like, oh man, you did it. If I wasn't ready, if I wasn't prepared, if my conditioning wasn't there, or if it was and I was there and I made this happen, it's all on you. There's nobody else to point the finger at. It's about getting yourself prepared for opportunities and then striking when the opportunity presents itself.
Definitely. And, Troop, I just want to ask you on that note, with the competition, preparing yourself for competition, you've had the opportunity to attend the camps from Scientific Wrestling for our mutual friend, Jake Shannon. Can you talk a little bit about some of your experiences there?
I would love to. So I've trained with Jake and did some of the camps. And then I've also trained with Wade Shawls, who's one of his coaches. The Pinisher is what he calls himself.
Yeah.
And the Pinisher, it's, as you can say, like the Punisher, because he doesn't just pin you. He puts you down in a spot where you want the referee to end the bout. Like, smashed in your face, rolled up in a little ball. And so the type of competitor that I am, or jiu-jitsu guy that I am, like, let me feel it, because there's so much invisible forces going on that you don't really know exactly what's happening until you felt it, and then kind of put it on somebody else. You're like, oh, okay, now I see. Well, having the opportunity to train with guys that have the knowledge that Jake Shannon has, or that Wade Shawls has, and Wade Shawls has more pins in college history than anybody ever. So these are guys that have been there and done that. Jake Shannon has traveled around the world with Billy Robinson, done stuff with Carl Gotch, the who's who of catch wrestling since catch wrestling was as mainstream as it's been today. You know, all the big names of catch wrestling. So Jake showed a lot of very effective techniques, as well as Wade. One of the things that I really liked about the scientific wrestling camps is Jake teaches what he calls terminal takedowns, which will be a takedown immediately into a submission hold. Because once you take somebody down and things settle, their defenses settle as well. And now you got to worry about legs, this and that. Not that you don't, but don't when you get the takedown. But it's far easier to swing around something when somebody's getting ready to hit the ground. Bam, I might pass those legs and be looking for that underhook for the far side armbar or double wrist lock. And so by chaining together takedowns into submission attacks, you just increase the effectiveness and efficiency of what you're doing. And that's one of the big things Jake shows, because catch wrestling is about getting in and finishing people. And not just finishing them, but being a little bit mean about it. One of the things Wade Shaw said was, like, if I beat a guy by 2, I'm going to have to compete against him again. If I beat a guy by 8, I've already beaten him on the next match. And sometimes you get in and you be mean and you force up. And if you made a guy miserable hoping he was going to get pinned, that dude does not want to wrestle you again. So you go in and compete in a way that other people are watching, like, or that the guy who's in there is like, I don't really want to do that again.
And I'll tell you the truth. You know, one of my old mentors and coaches, Billy Wicks, used to say, make them feel like they're drowning. And the only way to get out is to get off the mat. And I have something interesting with respect to Wade Chalice for the fans of old school shooters. Wade wrestled for, was a national champion at Clarion. Now, it used to be Clarion College in PA, and then it became, now it's Clarion University. And they used to have a fantastic wrestling program. One of my old teammates from high school who actually wrestled there, and they used to have this guy, Coach Bub, that recruited him. That was awesome. And Wade Chalice, while at Clarion, the same school where Kurt Angle wrestled. Everybody knows Kurt Angle, right? And won the gold medal. Wade created a move that was a modification of existing moves, and he called it the spladle. He was the inventor of the spladle, so he created his own move, and he really knows how to inflict pain on his opponents. And some years ago, Jake used to have a DVD that starred Wade Chalice, so it was an instructional called Legal Pain, and it was fantastic. So that's awesome to hear, and I want to bring my co-host on board here, the Great North Wrestling Executive Vice President, Jack Kilby. Jack, you've been listening to us, and just kind of come in here and tell us what are your thoughts about our awesome guest, Truth.
Well, Blake, you mentioned that you're, well characterized as a Renaissance man in terms of your resume for mixed martial arts, catch wrestling, you name it, you've done it. What fans of the Hannibal TV are particularly interested in is your tenure with professional wrestling. And I find it interesting, as King touched on, the roots and the intersect between pro wrestling and legitimate combat sports. But what in your case was part of your decision to pursue that as yet another accolade for yourself?
So interesting how I got into professional wrestling. So I was born in 87. I'm 35 years old. So I grew up in the early, golden era or late golden era, attitude era, and so forth. So that's the rest of the Monday Night Wars, I grew up a massive wrestling fan, staying up all night playing wrestling video games, particularly on Nintendo 64. But so right around this time is when kayfabe broke, late 90s or so. And I believed it broke a young Blake Troop's heart to find out that wrestling was not shoot competition. And right around this time is when the UFC first started. Given it wasn't as mainstream as it is today, and it was a little wild back then to most average people. I'm a fan of the purism of the old school UFC fights, but I understand why they're not as socially acceptable. But so this is early UFC now, and early UFC stole my heart. Zuffa then took over, and it became more mainstream in like early 2000s, and continued to take a shift towards a more socially acceptable sport with like rules and regulations and so forth. So kayfabe breaking and the UFC coming out, the timing on that, mixed martial arts stole my life, stole my heart. So early 2000s, I started training jiu-jitsu with some people that are Higa Machado black belts. And I just happened to stumble into that. I had a friend who was overweight. He's like, hey, I want to do kickboxing classes. Will you do some kickboxing with me? And I was like, yeah, let's do it, bro. Like, I had a big brother. I was a big brother. So, like, I was used to playing rough. Like, yeah, bro, let's do it. And we just had, and this is like 2001 when jiu-jitsu school wasn't on every block, And we just happened to train at some of Higa Machado's black belt schools with like Chris Howder and some other people, and got great training very early, and jiu-jitsu stole my heart. I went to kickboxing, and I continued to do kickboxing, but jiu-jitsu really ended up starting to take my heart there. Trained mostly no-gi for a while, and then did some gi, wasn't a huge fan of that. And then I graduated high school in 2005, and I got a job working at On the Mat Fight Shop with Scott Nelson and Ryan. What was your last name? But so Scotty and Ryan from On the Mat in 2006. So this is like my first job outside, or my first job after college. And as a result of being in the fight game in like 2005, 2006, with Scott Nelson, who, like I said, owned On the Mat, tons of guys would be coming and staying at his house. Nate Diaz, BJ Penn, like who's who back in this period of time. And so I got very well connected within the fight game, working at this job. Long story short, I eventually started fighting about a decade later. And my first 9 fights, I went 4-5. I did not have a great start to my career. I jumped right into the pros, fighting on television. My second fight was in the RFA. You guys mentioned Pat Miletich earlier. Pat's commented a handful of my fights in RFA and LFA. But so I went 4-5 in my first 9 fights. Let me rewind. Right before I went pro, I graduated college. I had a decent job working as a sports medicine person for Chivas USA of Major League Soccer on their sports medicine team. And I talked to the coach one day, and we're at lunch. He's like, so this is what you want to do with your life? And I was like, yeah, well, I love athletic training and working with athletes, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, no, kid, like, this is what you want to do with your life. I'm like, yeah, I can see myself doing this, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, kid, I don't think you understand the question. You are either building your dream or helping somebody else build theirs. And it sat with me for a second, for like a day or two. And was that what I wanted to do with my life? I would have been okay with it. It would have been settling. But I really wanted to pursue a professional fight career. So I gave myself 5 years. It's like, I'm gonna give myself 5 years, and I'll reevaluate within 5 years and go from there. So 2.5 years in, I'm 4-5 in my first 9 fights. And I'm almost like 2.5 years in, I almost considered stopping fighting. I was like, it's not going as I thought. There was a good amount of hype around me because I'd been in the business for so long. I thought I was really good. And I felt like I was good. I just didn't understand how to compete at that level with that high level of an athlete yet. I should have gone amateur. Woulda, coulda, shoulda. But so 2.5 years in, I considered stopping. But I was like, dude, you gave yourself 5 years to go after your dreams. Like, and give yourself a real shot at it. Like, we're not going to stop. What we're going to do is we need to do some shit different. And I started looking around at guys like Conor McGregor, who's getting a massive push. And not that Conor can't fight, because Conor can absolutely fight, but they have Conor favorable matchups where he was going to be able to look highlight reel-ish, or guys like CM Punk, who, and this isn't a dig on CM Punk because I have a ton of respect for the guy getting in the UFC cage, but a guy who got in the cage not based upon his accolades in combat sports, or even, again, I'm not trying to dig on the guy, but not his skill set either. He got there because he was CM Punk. which bothered me at the time when I'm watching this happen. I'm over here been training for like 10, 15 years, like to get here. This is my dream. And you got guys just strolling in. And so for a period of time, I was a little like, I wouldn't say bitter about it, but like I'm over here putting what I think is my everything into it. And I've seen other guys like I said, CM Punk get a push. I believe Connor deserved the push. I believe he was working really hard. But looking at guys like that are getting these massive opportunities, not because of their fighting ability. Could Connor fight? Yes, but Connor gets Connor opportunities because he's Connor. I was like, I need to figure out I need to boost the entertainment value of my brand, because entertainers are coming in this sport and being able to get the big opportunities because they're entertaining and they can put asses in seats. So instead of stopping, I pivoted a little bit. I created my brand of Bulletproof Troop, and I started increasing the entertainment value of my brand, coming up with my catchphrases and, having a logo. I always wear camouflage, so there's like a theme to what I'm doing and so forth. And like there's a ton of stuff that goes into it. I started that in 2016, Bulletproof Troop LLC in 2016. Started treating it much more like a business and a career than just a kid going on an adventure. And so as I created this brand of Bulletproof Troop and trying to be this entertainer, what was I essentially trying to do is create a professional wrestling personality in combat sports. And that brought me back to watching a lot of the legends and studying guys like Ric Flair. Ric Flair says woo, I say bang bang. Given it's different, but it's my genuine way of, I don't need to reinvent the wheel. How do I look at things that have worked for big name people, and how do I implement that wheel on my own vehicle in my own genuine way, where I'm not ripping off woo woo by saying bang bang, but then you can see the inspiration of, you just say woo when people think Ric Flair. Man, I'm trying to make it, when I say bang bang, people think of Bulletproof Troop. Given I'm looking on a big level, but even outside of just professional wrestling, every team has team colors, so like if I got a bunch of camouflage in the crowd, people now feel like they're part of something and so forth. I call them my Bulletproof Troopers and my Bulletproof Troopettes, or my bombshells, where like I try to really create not just a team environment, but a whole personality, which was essentially, like I said, a professional wrestling personality. So got me back watching a lot of pro wrestling and brought a lot of my love for the entertainment that's in professional wrestling, because that's really what we're there for. It's, if we want to watch crazy fights and stuff, given I don't mind watching a wild match, but it's the entertainment, it's the build-up, it's the emotion that we're putting into these built-up pay-per-view matches, or this back and forth, I can't wait to see them fight. How do I do that for me? And so I started studying a lot of professional wrestling and applying a lot of these techniques into my own brand and then into building of matches. And so that's what brought me back to professional wrestling. About 2 years into Bulletproof Troop, I had the WWE express a little bit of interest. Never turned into a tryout or anything. But I knew I was on the right track and to continue doing what I was doing. I've worked in commentary a bunch as a fighter as well, including professional wrestling. I've actually commentated 4 NWA title changes and hundreds of matches of professional wrestling, maybe even 100 episodes of television for professional wrestling. So what brought me to pro wrestling was, it was my original love. I saw what the landscape was changing to, and in my opinion, is going to continue moving in that direction.
Yeah.
And it just made me want to study it again and look at it all again. And now I wasn't worried about it not necessarily being shoot competition. I looked at it as entertainment. And it brought my whole love for professional wrestling back, because I didn't feel like I was like almost betrayed. Like, you had me. It's still real to me, damn it. So that's been the arc of Bulletproof Troop, the professional wrestling lover as a child, and kind of growing. I wouldn't say growing out of that. I would say taking a step away from it for a while, and then bringing my passion back to it when I realized I could be doing a lot of the same things, because I grew up dreaming of being a professional wrestler. When kayfabe broke, that really changed, and fighting really, like I said, stole my heart. I wanted to be a pro fighter. That's why that conversation with the coach was so impactful for me. Is you're either building your dream or helping somebody else build theirs. This is the only time I got it. I can't come back in 10 years and be like, I'm going to go give it a shot as a pro. It'd be too late for me now to want to step in there. I'm a decade into my fight career now. And so that's been how I came back to professional wrestling. And because of what I liked about pro wrestling and my brand and stuff, I've tried to implement. I'm not Blake Troop, Bulletproof Troop going and doing pro wrestling. This is Bulletproof Troop, the MMA fighter getting into a professional wrestling ring. I try and bring the realism, believability, whether it's in my promos, my skill sets, my appearance. We're like, damn, this guy looks like he could fuck some shit. Or, pardon my French.
Troop, there's a great line I'll give you that you can use, that I love to use is, you say, there isn't a damn thing I do in that ring to my opponent that I can't do to every one of you fat slobs that's buying a ticket to watch me.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah, you could feel free to use that, Troop, because it kind of dispels, because I'm a big fan, and that's what I love. I've told Jake so many times about the Shoot Pro, is he's putting the genie back in the bottle, man.
I feel the exact same, the genie back in the bottle of the Shoot Pro, which is why I love the shoot competition. But we're going to have the same, try and build up, where we have the characters and stuff, where it's still entertainment.
Hell yeah.
Like
Jake is
passed out to him.
Yeah, like Jake has said, it's a shoot in the ring, but we're going to have all kind of colorful angles. And, I'm going to tell the fans this because it's kind of sad. And a mutual friend of ours was involved in this. When I first started working with Jake 2 years ago, and he asked me to do some business development, I brought in Stephen Bonner, great friend, and Forrest to do the commercial, and they were going to be doing. Bonner was supposed to be doing the commentary with me for the next show, so we want to say R.I.P. and we've done tribute shows here. I did a great tribute show with Mike Goldberg, and we did a great one with Pat Miletich, and where we remembered Stefan and want to continue to keep his memory alive. And I'll kind of peel the curtain back for this for the listeners. We had a concept, because it's not going to happen. We had a concept of Bonner coming in like a Scott Hall to the Shoot Pro and utilizing this through Colin Crandall, who's our matchmaker, who has his MMA Power Hour show and has the fighters that are fighting every weekend on, and he's out there asking questions to all the fighters at the press conference. He's got great relations. He's our matchmaker because we wanted to create a UFC invasion angle. So the thing about Shoot Pro, all the idea process is, it's a shoot in the ring, but don't think that this is going to be bland. This is going to be high-level entertainment.
I love that. And like I said earlier, with UFC and WWE both being under Endeavor's roof, I think that's the future, and I think anybody getting on board with that is going to beat Endeavor or UFC or WWE to the punch. I recently heard that WWE tried to sign Nate Diaz to do a shoot boxing match at a pay-per-view event against Logan Paul. And Nate turned it down. He's like, I'm not going to get on go into a boxing match in a wrestling ring, blah, blah, blah. But it just goes to show that's where their head is too. Shoot boxing match, professional and there's going to be a WWE buildup. This is what the future of combat sports are. Whether it's boxing, grappling, I just particularly think grappling, because a lot more guys can be able to do it without taking the damage. How often can you spar or box competitively, and how often can you grapple competitively? Two very significant differences.
Definitely.
It's the same recipe, just what's happening at the end. You're just seeing an actual shoot competition. Like, this guy was talking about his mom and blah, 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 and he's pissed. Well, now we're actually going to get to see him tangle up a little bit, and I think that every combat sports athlete at the higher levels are realizing that you need to start talking if you want to sell pay-per-views.
Definitely. And it's going on tonight. It's going on tonight, Troop. You've got Diaz and Jake Paul fighting tonight. I mean, you're working with my friend Damon Feldman, Celebrity Boxing. I mean, he's known this for decades. I'm trying to
get Shoot Pro Wrestling at Celebrity Boxing. I bounced it off him. He seems interested. Trying to work on some of that.
But it's been going on.
That real quick. So I pitched it to Damon. He seemed interested. We haven't had any deep talks about it. But if we're able to get Shoot Pro Wrestling on a celebrity boxing event. There is a slight chance, this has just been very minor discussions, but that you might be seeing a tag team of Bulletproof Troop and Davey Boy Smith Jr., who is the British Bulldog son. The Bulletproof Bulldogs may be making an appearance potentially at a celebrity boxing event sometime soon. Going to show the world that Catch is king, baby.
That would be awesome. That would be awesome. Now, Jack.
Still early talks, but I'm excited about Shoot Pro, and I'm excited to potentially be able to represent Shoot Pro on such a big platform with such a wide audience. Not just pro wrestling fans, not just boxing fans, not just combat sports fans, but the entire entertainment world. Because Celebrity Boxing puts together an event that's just a variety show, and the Shoot Pro.
On that note, Troop, people here on the channel can see I was working with Celebrity Boxing in 2018. I hosted in Fort Lauderdale, and we had Christine Curran from Dining Divas on, and we had Nat D from Mob Wives on here, and they were in the main event. And then recently we did at Berman Law Group, we had Jenna was facing Nat D, and we had them in studio for Damon for the interviews that are also here on this channel. So we've done a lot of stuff with Damon, and he's a great dude. But I want to bring Jack back in on it, back to the pro wrestling. Jack, I think you'd probably agree with me that the NWA is so cool. That studio wrestling concept. What do you think? What do you think, Jack? And then you can talk to Troop about the NWA.
Well, yeah, I mean, for those of us of a certain vintage that particularly got TBS, that whole studio wrestling atmosphere is definitely iconic. And what I enjoy about Billy Corgan's NWA is the effort to capture that essence, yet move it forward in a direction that is modern. So, yeah, nothing but good stuff there. But it's interesting you bring that up, because that was one of the things I wanted to mention with Troop, which was how did you I have some multi-part questions, as I'm apt to do sometimes. The first part being, how did you first get involved in Billy Corgan's NWA? And I'm a fan of your tag partner and your team with Jax, and I'm just wondering, how did that tandem come together? It's a highlight of the programming for sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Definitely putting my everything into getting inside of the National Wrestling Alliance ring and performing to the best of my abilities. So how did I get involved with the NWA? My coach is Chris Silvio, who also manages me. Chris Silvio, ES2 of the NWA. He's also managed Jax for a long time, or a very significant period of time. In December, my coach told me that he thought that I was ready for an opportunity like NWA. I wasn't booked on the show, but I flew myself out of pocket, bet on myself, went to, I don't know if it was Memphis or Nashville, somewhere for a taping, 2-day show. Came in, shook hands with people, made sure that I was seen and was respectful and nice. And then I woke up to day 2 to, hey, you got a match today. My coach told me he thought I was ready. He's like, and I think I'm 6'4", 240, jacked. But so my coach is like, when they see you and then they hear more about you and your background, and not just that, but that you can talk, he's like, they're probably going to be interested in using you. I think it's a gamble to take on yourself. So I did. And by day 2, I had day 1, I didn't have anything going on. I was just meeting people and so forth. Day 2, I woke up to finding out that I had a match. Ended up having a singles match with JR Kratos. And I was 14 months into my career at this time. My debut with the National Wrestling Alliance was the main event for NWA Power, which was, for being 14 months in and being in a main event position for an NWA Power for the Christmas special as well, was a big deal to me. Unfortunately, it was the first and only singles match that I've lost. So I'm like 40-1, somewhere in that neighborhood right now in pro wrestling. Singles matches. But so Chris Silvio brought me in, and so he managed me, came out and said I was a new signing of his, came and showed that I can come in and I can work, and I can move and I can listen and I can put on a show. And so they kept bringing me back. And like I said, I was 14 months into my career for my first NWA performance. I want to say the next one was probably 2 months later, February. I think it was probably February in Tampa. And so, obviously, being 14 months into my career, 16 months into my career, I was relatively green. And I still would say, in the grand scheme of things, I'm relatively green. So they put me in a tag team with Jack Stain, managed by Chris Silvio, so that I am now able to sit under the learning tree of a guy like Jack Stain, who's been there and done just about everything there is to do in the NWA. He's won every single belt except for the USA Tag Team titles, which we've been this close to picking up in the Country Gentlemen a couple times now. But so I got put in a place where now I'm able to sit under the learning tree of somebody who's really invested in my career. Not just that, but that we look good in the ring. Because if anybody doesn't look good in the ring, everybody in the ring doesn't look good. So having the ability to sit under the learning tree of Jax, watch him put things together, see how he talks to people in terms of putting together matches or getting things in that we want to get in, and finding ways to make different things work. And I would say most importantly, how to tell a story when we're in there. Like what's the story we're trying to tell? Okay, let's build a match. And so being able to work with Jack Stain has been an invaluable experience that, I eventually want to be a singles wrestler, but I don't think I was ready for it. And as hoorah as I was going into the NWA, I think it was the best thing they could have done for me, because I was able to get in and learn some lessons. And just like I say, my fight career, where there were lessons I could have learned as an amateur, or like the silver medals, there's losses I've taken as a tag team competitor because I got caught slipping a few times, but they're not on my singles record. I've only lost once on my singles record. So it's also been an opportunity to learn some lessons without having a massive impact on my single competitor brand. And I'm getting quick rolled up once or twice. We don't have quick roll-ups in MMA, or there's no tag team partner in MMA bouts. So there's been a little bit of a learning curve in terms of competing inside of the professional wrestling ring. But knowing I got a guy like Jax watching my back and then helping me be prepared for the opportunity, it's been an awesome experience.
Excellent. Do you have any thoughts on I've asked a lot of the individuals that have transitioned or segued or whatever nomenclature you want to put around it from MMA to pro wrestling. What do you feel in terms of your background has been a hindrance, and what has been a help to making you the television wrestler that you are today?
I would say having a background in combat sports, particularly Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and other varieties of MMA catch wrestling, is if you can manipulate a body that doesn't want to go somewhere, if they're willing to work with you, it's significantly easier. Like I already know how far a joint's going to go this way or that way, roll people through, face this way, adjust, move on the mat, scoot just a little, whether I'm scooting towards a guy, maybe I need to scoot my hip out to turn through. Being able to move like that on the ground already, because it's learning to move on the ground again. If you haven't done it, it's you got to learn again, because the last time the majority of people have been moving around on the ground was when you're crawling around as a baby. So being able to scoot, shift, roll, flip over and do, maybe you only have one foot and one hand, and you got, maybe you don't even have hands. Maybe you got to do a bridge on your head, things of that nature, where I'm already able to move confidently in that manner. There are some adjustments with different types of holds and so forth, or maybe the pressure that certain things are applied. Not that that's been difficult to accommodate, but it's one of the big differences. I would also say another thing that might have been a little bit of a hindrance is you can slow down through some stuff more sometimes and like really make a guy fight out. But the thing is, and it's just something that I don't like about today's professional wrestling, most guys don't have the skill to be able to kind of fight out. They need to just be let go.
And that's what makes for a great match.
Battling of two bulls or locking horns when the guy's not really. I'm going to make the guy fight out a little bit. All right, push my. If they can't get out, then I'm going to tell you how to. All right, push my knee off, scoot away a little bit, start sitting up.
Yeah, I'll tell you on that note, Jack. When I got into doing some professional wrestling myself, I used to I brought guys that I coached with or guys that I had coached in wrestling. Those were mostly my best opponents. And In wrestling, we drill and giving people openings, going in and out of techniques. And I've said this so many times before, getting guys who are shooters off the mat and into the ring is what makes for the best matches. I had the opportunity to wrestle Stephan Bonner in that mixed tag. That was a blast. Baroni, Severn back in the day. But I also brought guys like Steve Alponi, who was coached with me in high school. He had wrestled at Anderson College. Some of my best matches, because that's how I got into pro wrestling, was when I was doing judo. My buddy Dave, way back in the day, was doing pro wrestling. Nobody knew how to get into it, and he just took me around as his opponent. That was back in Connecticut, Rhode Island. So what Troop is saying is, that's what makes for the best matches. I never went to a pro wrestling school. I don't really believe in them. I think that the shooter style is better and makes for better matches. Look at the career of Dan Severn. The way that Dan Severn wrestles in pro wrestling, you're going to have to keep up. He chewed up The Rock when he first got in, and he told me some funny stories about that because, The Rock being solidified in the business with his dad, and he doesn't like The Rock. That The Rock was cocky punk, and there was a match on YouTube that I used to show people with Dan just holding The Rock down like a baby, and you could see The Rock getting frustrated and just wrestling The Rock into the ropes, and The Rock couldn't follow him. But contrary to that, you look at a guy who I've talked about here on the show, Brian Danielson. He had great matches with guys who could follow him. And my experience with him was at Extreme Couture when Kamal and I were out there. And Kamal was a beast. And we were staying with a guy named Neil Melanson, who was his roommate. He used to run Extreme Couture, right?
I know Neil.
And Neil's a really good friend. And
OG catch wrestler, too.
Yeah, and I set Kamal up to live there, but this is the thing. I told you guys, go and watch when Kamal fought Khabib. It's the most competitive fight Khabib ever had. Brian Danielson, and I saw this with my own eyes on the mat, was very competitive grappling with Kamal on the feet and on the mat. So I have a ton of respect for him, and we need to bring back respect to professional wrestling. That's what Old School Shooters is about. We need to bring guys like Troop, who's a stud. That's what professional wrestlers should be feared. It shouldn't be something that every punk on the street thinks they could do. The old school is getting guys in the ring and stretching them when they want to come into the business. Look at Undertaker. When he was on Rogan's podcast and talks about his experience with Buzz Sawyer, who Dan barely outpointed in high school nationals. Buzz Sawyer, you look at Hulk Hogan. He stayed and toughed it out, and that's what Old School Shooters is about. So the Troop is just such a great guest, man, and I wanted to I know he's a little younger of a guest than we typically have, because we usually have old farts like you and I, Jack. But I want you to ask that question to him about the old school, because I think that Troop is old school.
Yeah, well, that's an excellent point, King. It doesn't necessarily mean your chronological age, but Troop, what we like to ask our guests on this podcast is the meaning of old school to you, be it in terms of application in your combat sports, pro wrestling, business pursuits, or just your general mindset, because we are definitely of an opinion that the old school mentality and what you make of it is something that would be a benefit to society today. But just want to get your take on what that means to you, sir.
So old school, and I appreciate that. I definitely feel like I can relate a lot more with old school mindsets. And I'm going to even take it outside of just professional wrestling into just regular life. Where old school is in self-respecting, man of your word. You're real. You're what you say you are and what you do. You're not just this social media putting on an image, and that you're willing to go out there and get your hands dirty. You know, like I think a lot of people pull guns out in fights nowadays because they're not willing to take a fucking loss. And what kind of man is that? You know, like this wasn't a big epidemic a bunch of years ago because I think that men were willing to go fight for their whatever it may have been, you know. And I don't have an answer on why some of that changed. I think a lot of the real ones probably went and died in wars and so forth, while the people who weren't willing to stand up for something stayed home, you know. And I think that social media has had a massive impact on that as well. It shocks me how people don't care about their reputation or their word. Like my word is everything to me, you know. Like it's one thing you won't hear about me is, man, he told me this and it was that. Like that'll never be the case, you know. And I think that's an old school thing. Self-respecting as well. I don't think a lot of people respect themselves, which is why I don't think they respect their lives, their bodies, their careers, their futures, their significant others, etc. You know. And I think a lot of that self-respect is earned through grinding and hard work. You know, they say sports develop character, but I don't necessarily think sports develop character. I think sports reveal character. You get put in bad spots, like given. I said I got 4 silver medals, and I know how many I got out of like 30 something because it was a tough loss for me. But at the same time, I'd rather take that loss and go learn from it than have never stepped on the mat. And I think it's a big thing. People would rather not lose today. They'd rather not put themselves in this position. They'd rather not be let down. And that's just not what I think America or like was founded on, or what being a man is all about. I would have rather gone and tried to ask that girl on a date and got shut down than have been like, man, she's so hot. Oh my God, she is.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. In that respect, is the world today, dude. I have a 21-year-old daughter, beautiful daughter, so I can see how some of the youngsters are around women now, and the way that these women are. You know, I mean, God, it's disgusting. Like the guys, they don't have a backbone, and the women, they put themselves out there like, you know, they want to sell videos of them, you know, to the guys rather than the guys actually smashing. It's like, dude, it's nuts, man. And you know, I when I was younger, I've told some of the stories. You know, I started bouncing when I was in college, and I learned that how strippers were the best con artists. And now a lot of these young women, they're like even better con artists than the strippers were back then, and the guys are just a bunch of pussies. So it's a weird world, man, that we're living in today, man.
I agree 100% with all of that. And then I'll tie in some of the old school for combat sports. I think a big one is combat sports and stuff, particularly like jiu-jitsu or early fighting. You're supposed to go in and be mean and F somebody up, you know? Now you have butt scooting in jiu-jitsu, which blows. And I get we want to get to the ground faster, blah, blah, blah. But like, dude, this is simulated combat, not butt scooting towards somebody. Like, really? You know, like things like that where it's getting in and grinding and being rough. You mentioned earlier that Wayne Shaw's had what was the pain thing that he
had legal pain back in the day. That was instructional. Yeah,
legal pain. And so when I trained with him, I kept using the term pain compliance. He's like, I love that. I'm naming my next video pain compliance. But the thing is, modern era jiu-jitsu is nice, kind of like it's frowned upon to grind your forearm across the face or like jam an elbow in the body. And it's like,
oh yeah,
this is simulated combat. Like me and him are pretending to fight to the death right now. And they're like, oh no. Like you can't do that. You can't rape choke. And it's like, that's like, man, I'll pass, jam my throw down, pass, smash the face, rape choke, smash face, pass, hip in. Like, it's not supposed to be nice. It's combat sports, guys. And I think that goes along with some of the pussification of the world. And that's like some of the old school, if you want me to get old school about combat sports and particularly grappling, like jiu-jitsu came up, people like, oh, you got to have, and I'm not bashing, I'm a big fan of the Eastern martial arts with like honor and respect and discipline and so forth. Oh, people want to talk about jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu came up because these tough guys would go into gyms and kick the shit out of everybody multiple times sometimes.
And on that, man. And on that note, I mean, the history of jiu-jitsu was Mitsuya Maeda. Count Koma, who was a judoka and catch wrestler who taught the Gracies, man, and Elio Gracie, the patriarch. Who did he compete against? Vladik Zabisco, catch wrestler that absolutely ragdolled him. And Helson put something out there about that. You know, recently how Helio barely survived, but he showed his toughness. Fred Ebert, beat the hell out of Helio. He was a catch wrestler. Masahiko
Kimura, too.
Kimura broke his arm. Masahiko Kimura. And Jake and I are going on Prime and Entertainment to talk about Ricky Dozan and how he was killed and just the old school with the
That's a
Yakuza
crazy
involvement,
story, too.
man. Yeah,
Ricky Dillon
yeah.
kicked the shit out of Kimura, too.
Hell yeah. Ricky Dozan beat the living shit out of Kimura. Gary
It was
Tonin
ugly, too,
and
watching that.
yeah, yeah, Gary Tonin and Gordon Ryan were on Rogan's show when Rogan played that video of Ricky Dozan beating the hell out of Kimura, and they started talking about how Kimura was named after him. And one of the things that's really cool that I told Jake is Eric Paulson, who I did my Rough and Tumble book with, great friend, coach, mentor. He was on Eddie Bravo's show, and he told me, he goes, I got Rogan a copy of Rough and Tumble. And the cool thing is, when now, like you hear these clips with Rogan that Jake shares, and he talks about a lot of the shit that's in the book. And I'm like, man, that's fucking cool, because I wrote all but like 4 paragraphs of that book.
That's
So,
gotta make it feel
yeah,
good.
it's fucking just cool to see that. It's good shit.
Especially
I mean, it's
Joe
good
Rogan.
shit.
He's been kind of a pinnacle in combat sports. He's been around since like what, UFC 9. You got a young
Yeah.
Joe Rogan with hair, and it's
Yeah. He came up through TV, news radio, and the stand-up scene at Dangerfields, and then he was on Fear Factor, of course, was the one a lot of people remember him for back in the day. But God, who would have ever thought that he'd be like the top media guy in the whole fucking country? That's crazy. Like this, what we're doing now, the podcast
so there's
universe,
a
man.
few people that end up superseding or like getting past bigger than the sport they were part of. Hulk Hogan, The Rock.
Yeah.
I think Joe Rogan has been one of those guys for mixed martial arts where, because you go on now, the Joe Rogan podcast used to be very combat sports heavy. Now you might get a scientist or a physiologist or like a lot
Very
of
rarely does he have, Pat was just on there, Milicic was on there, and that's been one of the last. I haven't really, you don't really see, because Pat was on there like a year ago, and you don't really see many. I mean, but he like triples the views of the nightly news. Yeah, he's huge, man. He's huge.
I think he asked some great questions. Like I'm a big fan of Joe Rogan podcast. Like he asked some very thoughtful, deep questions about things, and sometimes it's stuff I have no idea about. But like when it is topics that I'm familiar with, he asks some very thought provoking questions, or like brings up very thought provoking topics.
Yeah, man. He's a great listener, and my dad, rest in peace, when he was alive, man. My dad, when he was in the military, when he was in Air Force, he used to host the TV, and interview people and shit. And I remember he told me when I got into the broadcasting, he said, watch Johnny Cole, Johnny Carson, just learn how to like listen. And Rogan does that, man. He's a great listener.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of his work.
Yeah.
A fantastic commentator, fantastic podcaster, apparently fantastic martial artist too. I guess he had been doing traditional martial arts for a very long time. Has a black belt from Eddie Bravo, who is a very prestigious guy to get a black belt from.
Dude, I got a question for you, man. Who do you think? And my battery's low. We're gonna have to wrap it up soon. But who do you think is a bigger, more well-known personality, Dana White or Joe Rogan?
I would say it's hard to go against Dana White just because he's been the face for so long, and so repetitively you'll see him making very soundbite controversial comments that are just like, in my opinion, kind of to get that attention, which I don't think is dumb of him. I think he needs to play that Vince McMahon bad guy kind of role.
For sure.
But Joe Rogan, I think, is so widely. I think more regular people like and listen to Joe. I think that Dana White's face and who he is probably bigger than Joe. But at the same time, it's because he's the face of the promotion. You know, in my opinion, there's not a face of the UFC. The face of the UFC is Dana White.
He is, man. You know,
I think Connor's a great
sad.
fighter, but not the face. Same with John Jones, possibly the greatest fighter of all time, not the face.
Because I got
being protective of that and investing heavy in Dana, because they know Dana's gonna be there no matter what. Dana's not gonna maybe renegotiate to get some more money, but he's got like $1 billion almost now. You know, like
definitely. Well, guys, I hate to cut you off, but I'm at 1%. So before I don't want to be rude and the phone shut off. So I just want to close us out with our tagline and a little song from the chairman of the board. I've been to town, beyond the boulevard, down the beach, and I've done things I've learned things that only time can teach. Silver Sages spreading knowledge to the younger ages. Thank you to my co-host Jack Kilby and to our guest Bulletproof Blake Troop. And you all have a great day. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Follow us on Twitter at the Hannibal TV for instant updates.